I went to Oxford instead of going to art school, which was really the kind of choice. But I was always painting anyway. And after Oxford, I went off and taught in Germany for a while. And then some friends of mine said, why don't you come down and join us in St Ives? So I went to St Ives, and it was at that time the sort of important painters were, in a sense, they were doing all right, but the second layer was sort of very boring. It was muted local colour and squarish circles and circular squares and very dim landscapes. So it was either abstracts, just abstract, or just landscape. And we were young Turks trying to do different things and use bright colours and triangles and things like that. And then suddenly pop art was invented from somewhere or other, and we read about it in the papers. We hadn't seen any, and so we started doing pop art because, and it became a kind of terrific liberation, because instead of trying to be inventive, you could actually start talking about all the things that we'd worried about in our lives up to then, but had never thought were anything to do with art. Obviously, the Union Jack was one of the things that everybody was doing. You know, flags were in, and stamps were in, and commercial Campbell's soup tins, and all of that. But the background is a photograph which Erwin Rommel, General Rommel, took of the German advance into northern France. And so these are shell bursts, and that's a shell explosion. It's not actually a tree, you know, but there is a whole, I mean, it doesn't have an explicit story, but there is some sort of story going on. So the dog in the window is not particularly perturbed by the stuff that's going on at the back. I was in Eastwood on a bike or something, and there was this Lancaster bomber sitting. It was just an empty field with a Lancaster bomber in it, and it had been snowing, and there was this extraordinary green line underneath where the snow had fallen, and it was something which you couldn't have invented. We were inventing pictures at the time, but so that took us back to observation and drawing. And I think these two pictures represent for me the point at which somehow the work I was doing settled down, so that the shapes were more stable, and what I was trying to do was a lot clearer to me than it had been. But anyway, that was 62 and 64. When I came back from Germany, where I'd been teaching in a university, and that was the peak of my career, I then was at Hornsey and got involved in that, and that was a student revolt that the staff joined in, and then went to the North East London Polytechnic, and I taught there for a while, and then eventually they were getting rid of staff all over the country, and so the union said, well, now's a good time to take early retirement. So very early, in a sense, I took retirement, and I ended up coming up here, where I'd had a holiday cottage which I'd sort of partially rebuilt, and then from there we moved over to this house here. It's just the difference between a south-facing slope and a north-facing slope down to the same river valley. So this is a lot later on, after I'd come up here and started painting fields and started thinking about things that I had a general name for, which was field marks, and they were all to do with what people actually do to the land, and also to do with what the landscape actually looks like, as opposed to the image that people project on it through Constable tinted glasses or whatever. They were always wanting to see a landscape which isn't actually what's in front of them, and not looking at what's actually there. People think of the countryside, well, people in towns particularly think of the countryside as a sort of park, and it isn't a park. It's an industrial landscape, and it's been put there for very good reasons, and the kind of angularities are there because people want them to be there for particular purposes. From my point of view, this is a satisfactory picture, and with older pictures you can say it's satisfactory because you've been living with it for 20 years and it's all right, you know, but with more recent things you're never quite sure what's okay and what isn't okay, my experience. But from my point of view, all of this is what I wanted to say, and I have said it, and then if other people don't like it, then they don't like it. But it's got things going on all over it. There's a sort of mixture of marks which are all adding together, and which all have something to do with this pheasant in the corner. And there's something going on in all of it, including up in the sky here. There are contrails and little clouds which are doing the same sort of thing as little bits of movement on the landscape. And there are really sort of two fields that I look out on. And one of them kind of tilts up for me, which is a sort of cubist thing, really. But the other one is flat, and so you go out towards it or across it. And there's a constant struggle between the idea of making all the planes parallel to the picture surface or not having them parallel. And the problem with the sky then is that you can have a situation where the sky is a hole in the picture and is not a thing. And really you want everything to be a thing. So all of this sort of works. That might not work, but I think in fact it actually does work. You're getting a house shadow running across what's happening here. So there's this quite elaborate structure here, and against that one which is also quite elaborate in a way. I suppose they're sort of balancing one another out. I started painting quite long vista paintings, which it seemed to me that the problem of the hole which is left by the sky and the landscape, not quite so bad if that shape, that it seems to accommodate all of that better. And then there's this whole conglomerate of stuff was somehow quite held together by this house shadow. You know, as we all know, you get a certain way along the picture and the picture starts telling you what it wants to do, if you're lucky. When you're very lucky, you get given a picture. But this one was hard worked on, and I got the same, you know, that the contrails are up. Now, I've not been able to do a picture really that is more or less all sky, but I did like this picture a lot. And still do like it, and again, it's been around long enough for me to know that it's all right, where others might not be. From where I was looking, there was somehow a fold happening, but then I exaggerated it because it's nice to have. I would quite like to have the sort of disruptions that Cubism occasionally has, where you're forced to reconsider how things butt up against one another or don't, or overlay one another. That tree, which is much more elaborate in the other painting, is just sort of three marks. So one of the things that this is doing is it's getting towards a more iconic approach, where I'm more interested in a series of, or a small series of shapes, and I'm less interested in a kind of totality with a lot going on. But that might come back again, who knows. But this is on the way to simplification. That's looking out at the flat field, low meadow, which is a grazing meadow, but looking at it as if it was a plane parallel to the surface. But it's to do with simplifying the shapes and what they're saying. And it has a bird, which is the barn owl, that quarters that meadow. Some days it's toing and froing and toing and froing the whole time. I think it sort of does work that you go up to there and you sort of, there's a triangular mode of viewing, so you're going up and down and back and up and down and back, and the shapes are simple, and the shapes are getting simpler as I go on. The house is like a sundial. The shadow of the house moves around. It doesn't ever go down the garden, but it puts a sort of imprint on things, so it tends to get painted because I spot it out of the window. There's something weird happening here, and sometimes the things that happen that are weird are only things that last for 10 minutes, which is sort of like Impressionism, but also like the painting over there of a field which is being ploughed, and it's got spiky bits on it because the ploughman hasn't yet gone round and tidied up the edge, and that's only going to be there for 2 or 3 hours, and with the light and shadows, it's only going to be there for 2 to 3 minutes. And in the English landscape in general, which what makes it different from the landscape of Impressionism, is that you know it's not going to be the same in 10 minutes' time. You just know that, so you know there's no attempt to do a complete work in one go. So really, insofar as I'm a landscape painter, I'm painting a very close landscape. Most of the time I'm painting what's within 5 minutes walk from the house. I did say earlier on that sometimes you get given pictures, they're not something that you have worked up to consciously. So this one was about the shape of the ploughing lines on the meadow, but had become detached from it, and it was almost like a sort of dream. And I thought to myself, well, it would be interesting to know what it was like at night when you can't see it. And so I did a little sketch of it, what it would look like if you couldn't see it, and that looked rather promising. So then I did it onto this canvas and tried to do as little as possible to it, really, because it was just a trouvaille, they say in French. The one next to it was a different kind of being given, that I just thought it would be nice if there was a mauve field with marks on it. And then I thought, well, why don't I draw a mauve field with marks on it? And then I drew it. And so those two fit into, I've got up there a quotation from Verdi, and the Verdi quote says, to copy what's true could be a good thing, but to invent what's true, that's really much better. And it is nice but I think this is about as far as I go. I mean, I can't go any more abstract than that, because I've still got my connection to what's actually happening out there.